Happy go lucky.
And we are live. Hey there, Revere 311, former Marine infantryman, Revolutionary War reenactor, amateur history enthusiast. I always have to do the intro. And today we are going to be having a sit down with an amateur historian, and I'd consider you an expert on the Battle of Cowpens. So if you want to introduce yourself, Mr. Joe.
Yeah, hey, sorry. So, yeah, hey, Joe, go by Joseph as well, so whichever one. Um, I met Luke here, Revere 311, whenever we were at a reenactment in Kershaw. I have been doing reenactment for about 6 months now, I guess, considering. Love breaking down and digging deep into the Battle of Cowpens. It's a super big area of interest of mine, and I'm hoping that today, as we kind of talk about it, I'll be able to answer some questions, kind of give some insight onto how important this battle is and kind of how it changes the course of the war for the Americans later on near the end of the war. So, you got any questions for me before we kind of dig into it? Any?
Is the final battle on the Patriot based off of Cowpens, or is
very, very, very loosely? I get questions about that very often from friends of mine and people I meet whenever we talk about it. When Mel Gibson and his production team made the Patriot, they had actually stopped by the battlefield to ask some questions to the staff there, and whenever you look at the actual scene itself and compare it to battles in the actual Southern campaign, it takes an amalgamation from Cowpens and Guilford Courthouse, surprisingly enough. But yeah, in long story short, it's a loose interpretation of the Battle of Cowpens.
Okay. I might have just actually had that private for the whole intro. I hope I see it streaming now. This is nothing but the best. Here we go. There we go. Now we're live. All right. Hey there, Revere 311, former Marine infantryman, Revolutionary War reenactor, amateur history enthusiast, and we will do a take two on your introduction there, Joe. Joe is an amateur historian and an expert on the Battle of Cowpens. So, Joe, if you'd like to introduce yourself, let's get started.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Joe. Go by Joseph as well. I consider myself to be an amateur. Sometimes get called an expert on the Battle of Cowpens. I have studied about it and read about it a lot, considering I live in close proximity to it. So it's kind of nice to know there's a battlefield near me that's not Civil War in South Carolina for once. I've been reenacting for about 6 months now, give or take a little bit. I met Revere here at the local event in Kershaw about a week ago, I think, right? Is last weekend. And one thing I like to talk about when we talk about the Battle of Cowpens is to show just the sheer significance of the engagement there, how quick, how significant that the victory is, and how it actually plays a very crucial role in the Southern campaign, and what it does for the American morale and what it does for the American fighting spirit after the battle's over with, right? So do you have any questions for me before we begin? I think there's always a really popular one that floats around out there.
Yeah, we'll do the first one, which is the one that always comes to mind. Is the Battle of Cowpens what the final battle in the Patriot is based off of?
It is a very, very loose interpretation of the Battle of Cowpens, yes. Without spoiling too much for the main discussion, what's really cool about the Patriot is that when it shows the Battle of Cowpens in that final scene, the story of the Southern campaign is very prevalent in the Patriot, minus a man wielding tomahawks and throwing away his weapon every once in a while. But what you see as a result of the Battle of Cowpens, where the Americans are finally on the upper hand, they have the advantage. They're forcing the British off of the field, which is a very rare encounter in the Revolution, at least in the South. It's a very empowering moment, and that is very much portrayed in the actual movie itself. For the actual battle itself, when you see that engagement taking place, it's actually an amalgamation, from what I have found, of sequences from the Battle of Cowpens and the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. The main drawback being the Americans do not have any artillery on their side during the battle, and the numbers are going to be greatly, greatly increased in the movie for the sake of Hollywood. Whereas the real Battle of Cowpens, we were operating with minimal forces or at minimal capacity for a standing army, right? But yeah, long story short, the last battle scene in the Patriot is the Battle of Cowpens.
All right, well, let's get started. We'll do why does Cowpens matter? Why is the Battle of Cowpens considered one of the most brilliantly executed American victories of the Revolution?
Just its timing is what considers it to be probably one of the most significant engagements in the Southern campaign. If you're okay with me going ahead and breaking everything down, um, when you look at the Battle of Cowpens, you have to see where the Americans are, and so too with the British before you even begin talking about it. The Battle of Cowpens' significance does not lie solely in itself. So, um, to kind of answer the question blunt and flat out, the significance of it is, just where the American army is. It's very, very worn down. Morale's gone. They're in the entire army the Americans have at Cowpens. There's probably close to 1,500 estimated from what I've been reading. Only 380 of those are the remnants of the standing Continental Army that are able to mobilize and fight. So the American army is worn down significantly. The command staff, or generals more specifically, have been eliminated twice, whether fired or forced to surrender. And the American Continental Army in the South itself has been destroyed twice by the time the Battle of Cowpens rolls around.
What were those two? You said it's been destroyed twice. If you could go over those real quickly, what were the two?
Yeah, sure. And that's where this conversation kind of begins too. So the very first time it's destroyed, you have about 5,000 Americans within the Continental Army in the South of itself being taken as prisoner in Charlestown, which is now modern day Charleston, South Carolina, in May of 1780. Which what precedes that is the considered losses in the North by the British, where they both find themselves kind of in a stalemate, the Americans and the British. So when they begin laying siege to these southern port cities, Charlestown is one of their biggest targets. And when they take that city, 5,000 men are lost. You have the commander, Benjamin Lincoln, who is captured, and any and all communication to the Continental Army within that 2 weeks of that siege is totally cut off. So you have, again, the total and utter destruction of the Southern Army in South Carolina. And that's not just a South Carolinian continental line. That was the defending force for everywhere in the Southern colonies. That's North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia. It's a devastating blow for the Americans.
I think almost the entire Virginia line is captured. The unit I reenact with, the 7th Virginia, that's their final engagement.
That's one of their kind of last huzzahs.
Yeah, so that means the Continental Army is basically out of the South, right? South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. And what happens after that? The British have now taken essentially the largest city in the South. In the most economically prosperous colony built off of, obviously.
Yeah. The Southern Department of the war in general is just totally ransacked. The British, kind of backing up from that a little bit, the British were not having too many successes in the North, especially after Saratoga, right? When Saratoga happens, the French get involved, the Americans finally find a way to start winning their battles, and the British are just trying to find a way to make amends to that situation in any way possible. So when they get this victory in the South, it is a game changer. Now, that's not to say that the Americans were totally wiped out in Charlestown. So I mentioned there's a second time the army gets destroyed. When after May, the Continental Congress and George Washington start kind of getting together, because now they have to figure out how to replace the Southern Army. They have to figure out how to reinforce that army if they send a new reinforcement force down there, and then who is going to command that army, right? That's always the biggest deal when it comes to trying to do that stuff. Another thing too is trying to figure out how you're going to keep the army supplied. That comes in a little bit later. So Washington is trying to appoint a man named Nathaniel Greene to take that role, because there is still some hope for the Southern Department, because the British have not pushed in too deep at that point. However, the Continental Congress, due to past events at that moment in time, they find Horatio Gates to be the better fit for that position. And if you know anything about the Battle of Saratoga, he won that battle for the Americans. So Washington.
He's a former British officer as well, right?
Oh yeah. That's why they appoint him. They appoint him for a plethora of reasons, but for the main ones, because they think that because he's a British officer, that he knows the way with British tactics to fight the British in South Carolina. That's where he's most needed. So logistically speaking, it's where you send him, right? So when he is appointed, he will arrive to Hillsborough, North Carolina. He will take command of some remnants of the Continental Army that were not totally captured in Charlestown. and he will have a reinforcement force of about 12 or so hundred American Continentals from the states of Maryland and Delaware. These guys are going to be very, very, very important for the rest of the conversation, right? So he takes command of this new army. He begins his march on down to Camden because he feels that's going to be the most strategic point to deploy his forces in South Carolina. He will march them down there. They will have a collision with Cornwallis' army in the middle of the night on October 16th, and they will pause, take time, hold off. That morning, they go into an engagement with the British, and to subtract a bunch of details for the sake of time, the Americans are totally destroyed at that battle. I'll spare those details for a bit of a later time because it makes sense for part of the story of the Cowpens. So what happens is that Horatio Gates, who was able to manage to raise a force of about 4,200 troops, loses that entire army within the matter of an hour on August 16th. It's a catastrophic loss. The British are winning again. And what's bad about this is that unlike Charlestown, where we lost 5,000 soldiers captured as prisoner, we lose 1,000 soldiers at Camden killed alone, and then we lose so many hundreds more as wounded. And it is such a bad defeat that on the British side, Banastre Tarleton, a man who is known for being such a courageous, forward-pushing cavalry leader, writes in a personal memoir that he could see the bodies, the baggage, and the firelocks and accoutrements of the soldiers just scattered all across the road they were charging them on. And they were in the multitudes of hundreds. And then I forget who his name is, but an American patriot who was at the battle writes Thomas Jefferson. And in the best way I can quote it, says, imagine the worst possible thing you can think of. And the Battle of Camden was worse than that, right? It's catastrophic. And of course, when word gets back to the Continental Congress in Washington, Washington says, okay, Horatio Gates has got to go, right? Because if he has a folly like that, he's not fit to be the commander of an army, right? Especially 4,000 men. Like, that was ridiculous. There was no reason why he should have lost that many men in that such a short amount of time. So after all that's said and done, Nathaniel Greene finally gets appointed, but in the sense of, okay, but what army are you going to command, right? That's how bad the Continental Army gets after those two very catastrophic defeats.
So we're heading into the fall, and now we're almost 10,000 Continentals, militia. So that's a lot of guys. That's a lot of people to lose in the population of a colony that's 2 million, and we don't even know how many are rebelling. So we're heading into the fall. You just had these two. I think the surrender at Charlestown is the greatest loss of the American Revolution, which is towards the end of the war. And then the Battle of Camden is one of the worst losses of the American Revolution. Those are back-to-back, wipes out the entire Continental line for most of the southern colonies, including some of the middle colonies. And what happens next as we move into the fall?
So as we move into the fall, Nathaniel Greene, I'm about to say Horatio Gates' name, he's gone at this point. Nathaniel Greene gets appointed. He will make his way down to Charlottetown, where the army was put up for their winter quarters. And when he arrives there, he, of course, relieves Horatio Gates. And Nathaniel Greene, I forget where the memoir is, I don't remember the exact quote, but he pretty much says that he can barely even recognize that group of men as an army as it stands, because they are just so super bad off, right? This is where the Battle of Cowpens begins to take its place, the story of it. So you're looking at a couple of weeks before, you have probably about 900 men. These are soldiers who were able to escape the wrath of Camden. These are soldiers who have been sent to try to reinforce the army. And these are also some Virginians, more state troops that are sent by Thomas Jefferson to assist the army with what little effort they can, right? Because they are themselves as bad off as the rest of the army. You are also going to have repeated assaults from Banastre Tarleton, one major engagement known as the Waxhaws, which happens a little bit before Camden, but you have some reinforcements there being pretty much massacred in broad daylight. Morale is an all-time low because the British are just constantly harassing them wherever they can find them. And Nathaniel Greene, who is a quartermaster, by the way, is now given the task of trying to resupply and re-outfit the army with no money, with no support, and with only a couple of men who are probably the best chance he has. Those couple of men being Daniel Morgan, who was still en route to Charlottetown whenever Nathaniel Greene got there. John Eager Howard of Maryland, who is a very trusted Continental officer from Maryland. who was able to lead dozens of men off the field at Camden without losing any of them, or at least a good portion of them. And eventually William Washington of the 3rd Continental Light Dragoon Regiment. So Nathaniel Greene decides to make a really, really bold move in the face of a superior enemy, and that's he's splitting his force into 2 independent armies, right? Because by the time Daniel Morgan gets there by Christmas of 1780, he's going to give what half of the army is actually able to stand up and actually put on a fight to Daniel Morgan, with the sole task of avoiding confrontations with the British in open combat. But he is to spirit up the people, which means he's trying to gain support of the local militias. He is trying to, forage for supplies because, again, they're broke. And he is going to try to defend that quarter of South Carolina, which is the upstate region where I'm from, while, again, trying to avoid a confrontation. Because if he loses that section of the army, I mean, the army's already depleted as it is. If he loses a wing of it, that's it for the Continental cause, right?
And there's something interesting you just brought up that we talked about at the Camden reenactment, is that in winter, shouldn't they be going into winter quarters to rest, refit, train? I mean, that's what the armies do up north. What makes the southern campaigns different than your northern campaigns?
Think about it like this. Without going way too far into modern combat, like 20th century, there's a lot at stake for the Americans, and not only do the Americans realize this, but the British do too. So to kind of back up a little bit from where we are at the Cowpens, by October of 1780, Cornwallis realizes that he's pretty much got the Americans on the ropes, right? So he's going to have a man named Patrick Ferguson, who is tasked with trying to raise loyalist support for the British cause, and he's trying to raise provincial forces. And when he does that, he is trying to raise up the local population to basically hunt down and turn in any and all American patriots to diminish the patriotic cause in the southern colonies. However, by the time of October 7th, the Battle of Kings Mountain happens, and it just totally destroys that effort in South Carolina. And so now he has to turn to his other officer, Tarleton. By the time Nathaniel Greene makes it to Charlottetown, splits the army, and has Morgan coming to the backcountry of South Carolina, they realize that the Americans are very diminished, very depleted, and they are on the ropes, literally. And if they can find a way to destroy that Continental line that's left in South Carolina, there's really not going to be much more standing in the way of them, right? To put it this way, without, again, spoiling a lot of the story of the Battle of Cowpens, when you have the Continental Army as a whole, right? So look at the bigger picture. In the entire 13 colonies by 1780, 1781, so around return of the new year, you are going to have a lot of units in the north going to their winter quarters because that's just what they do, right? You are going to have 2,500 troops under General Washington in New York holding on to the city, and that's pretty much it for the Continental Army in the north, because by January, you're going to have the Continental line of Philadelphia mutinying against the Continental Congress to garnish their wages because they are being denied them because, again, we're broke. You're going to have other Continental lines mutinying or also going AWOL because they aren't being paid and they feel their time is better spent elsewhere. And in the South, well, we just talked about how we just lost 2 major Continental lines in the South. So at this point, when Morgan has these 380 Continental soldiers with him going through the backcountry, they are the tip of the spear. They are quite essentially the last of the combat effective fighting men for the Continental Army in the South. Because, yeah, sure, Greene's got some down there in the Cheraw area of South Carolina, but they are very, very much worse off than the rest of them with Morgan. So when Cornwallis and Tarleton realize that they are now split and Morgan has the last of the effective fighting men, if they are not to go into their winter quarters and chase down this contingent and, defeat them, that's a major stepping stone. There's nothing else in the way of them if they can take out that section of the Continental Army.
This just brings up a stat. When we talk about the loss of the Continental line, one of the resources I brought up here is they only had 8,700 Continental line in December of 1780. So it just goes to show, when you lose entire states' contingents of Continental line, you're losing 10 to 15, maybe 20%. So out of the whole Continental Army, that's huge losses of professional, experienced men. But all right, so we've set that up. So who is Brigadier General? Let's introduce the main character and let's get to the Battle of Cowpens. Who are the main characters? who is Brigadier General Daniel Morgan, and who is Banastre Tarleton. I know he's the
Daniel
bad guy
Morgan.
from Patriot.
Oh yeah. If you want to dive into that guy a little bit, we can. Very interesting figure. But Daniel Morgan, let's get him real quick. Daniel Morgan is a total madman in a good way. Morgan is a backwoodsman through and through. He is someone who is not afraid to get his hands dirty. He can take the rough of the rough. He can break his back and he can still walk. That's how tough this guy is. So for Daniel Morgan, to back up on his life story a little bit, to show you what this man's all about, he's born in the colonies to a Welsh family, and at the early age of 14 years old, he sets out on his own, becomes his own man, does his own thing. He leaves his family behind. Eventually in life, he becomes what's called a wagoneer, which is like a wagon train lead. And he is tasked with going through the frontier into very dangerous, treacherous territory to run supplies from one place to another. It is not an easy job. It requires the best of the best to do that job. And it can mean certain death if you're not careful, right? Eventually, Morgan finds himself fighting for the British in the French and Indian War. And in the middle of that war, he actually, the story goes, I forget what the cause of it is, he strikes a British officer in the face. And because of that, he is sentenced to be flogged 500 times on his back. It leads to a really funny story. So where whenever he's finally talking to his men at the Battle of Cowpens, he says that he counted and the British miscounted. They gave him 499 lashes, and the Battle of Cowpens was the last one they actually owed him. There's another story too where after the French and Indian War, he's leading a wagon train to the frontier and he gets ambushed and he actually takes a rifle ball to the back of the neck and it actually goes through the front of his mouth and he loses his front teeth. He gets like a little cleft lip scar on his lip and he survives and he just goes about his business. It's the most ridiculous story I've ever heard in my life. Considering that back in those times when dying from a gunshot was very likely, the man survives and lives to talk about it, which is very rare. So by the time the revolution kicks in, he is helping with the American fighting effort. He is actually at places like the Battle of Saratoga, leads a rifle corps there. He's responsible for doing a couple of things I'll break into a little bit later. And then after his service with the Continental Army, he demands that he be promoted because, well, he's doing a lot of work, right? And I don't know about you, but whenever I do a lot of work, sometimes I want to be recognized for it. So when his promotion is denied, he retires from the Army. He does not serve anymore. He maintains the rank of colonel until when he is asked by Horatio Gates to come help out with the Army. He says, I will only do it if you promote me. And that's when he gets the rank of Brigadier General. When he finally comes back to Southern Theater, he is going to be under the command of Nathaniel Greene. And Greene knows him from the Northern campaigns at places like Saratoga. And that's why he's tasking him with this task of trying to rebuild that section of the Army while trying to maintain its integrity. So you have a man with a good head on his shoulders, a lot of experience. He's not afraid of getting his hands dirty, but he also knows how to preserve himself and have a lot of patience in the process.
He also led one of the rifle companies that went up, one of the 10 rifle companies, and he was captured at the Battle of Quebec. So he goes up and he gets captured. Arnold gets away. Montgomery is unfortunately killed. But so he's a well-known, experienced leader. Mm-hmm. I'd be a bit crazy. So tell us about Banastre Tarleton.
Banastre Tarleton. So this guy is going to be
the bad guy, right?
Yeah, the bad guy.
He's going to be our antagonist.
Yeah, the antagonist. Tarleton is a very interesting figure. I'm still reading up on him, so my knowledge of him is still a little rusty in some areas, but I know enough to get by. With Tarleton, he is the exact polar opposite of a man like Daniel Morgan. So at the age of 14 for Tarleton, he is a mama's boy, daddy's boy, whatever you want to call it. He still stays with his parents. He is of a wealthy slave trading family in London. And so, of course, like anybody else in that time period, everything gets handed to him, right? He's a bright one. He's a bold one, but he is not the man that Daniel Morgan is, right? Considering, too, that by the time the Battle of Cowpens happens, he's only half of his age. I'm in my early 20s, and I think by the time he actually feels his first rank, he's about 23 or 24. He is super, super young when he gets his rank in the British Army. So eventually, over time, what happens is his father passes away, And like any bold man in that time period, being in the London lifestyle, he blows his entire father's inheritance on stuff like going to taverns, going and out gambling. He spends it on ladies of the night, with being as PG as I possibly can. And in the War at Saber Point, which is written by John Knight, here's Tarleton, this big, bad, courageous man that fights for the British Army, that the Patriot falsely accuses him of walking people into a church and setting it on fire. He's a really horrible man. But John Knight puts it that if you would have been in London and would have gone to a tavern he was going to, with how dashing and good looking he was, he's like, you would have wanted to go over there and have a drink with him. And he's like, he would have been your best friend because he would have paid for everything. But he was super nice. He was a gentleman. He didn't take crap from anybody, but he was very nice about the way he conducted himself. It's a very interesting story when you start talking about his private life versus his military career life. It's weird in a way. But eventually the father's inheritance blows out. He's got no money left to his name. He was trying to go to school. He drops out. I think it was for law, but I could be wrong. I think it was for law. And he finally goes to his mother, and his mother spends money that was going to his inheritance to buy him a commission in the British Army. So he goes in. He is a cornet or lieutenant cornet. I forget the exact rank he was. And he goes to serve in one of the Royal cavalry units that's stationed in London. That's not meant to be an expeditionary force, but more like a home guard, right? Revolutionary War breaks out. He wants a piece of the action. He comes over to the colonies, but he wants to increase in rank at the same time. So whenever he comes over here, he is granted a temporary promotion to a lieutenant colonel to be in command of a loyalist detachment known as the British Legion, which is a very feared, very effective cavalry unit in the Revolutionary War, more specifically in the Southern Campaign. Mind you, he's only going to be in his 20s whenever he achieves all of this. And he gains himself a reputation for being a very bold, very courageous, very bloodthirsty cavalry leader, although some of the accusations are a little false, in my opinion. And finally, after the siege of Charlestown, he actually goes to this place called the Waxhaws in South Carolina, where as a man named Abraham Buford is trying to lead an American force to reinforce the American effort in Charlestown, Tarleton cuts him off. And the story goes that as he's charging the main line, the Americans are trying to put up a white flag, and Tarleton disregards completely, slaughters the line, and then just leaves 3 mass graves of Americans behind, where one is still present to this day on the actual battlefield. It's horrible. But, there's some myths to that story that
because he doesn't say he did that, right? He says he was knocked off his horse, and the men lost control. He loses control because his horse gets down. So he's not out there saying, "Yeah, I knocked these boys around when they surrendered." He actually tries to defend himself.
Oh, he does. Yeah, he actually writes an account after the war describing the whole event. And if reading from his perspective, it's very interesting, to say the least, considering that he apparently kept perfect account of all of the stuff from the war 5 years after the fact. But what's really funny is that somewhere on the internet, I forget where the article is, there's a full breakdown of the massacre at the Waxhaws. And one thing that caught my eye about it was there was actually correspondence between Abraham Buford and Banastre Tarleton, talking about the conditions of surrender, what would have happened if he would have given up. And reading over it, Tarleton sends like a 2-page long letter to Abraham Buford saying that he would extend the same terms of surrender to those at Charlestown, and the 12 articles of surrender he lists pretty much say he's going to give the men all of their firearms and stuff back to them, and he will only take prisoners when needed, and that he's pretty much going to let them all go because he has no time to deal with them. He's way too far away from any main British holding to take prisoners. He just wants to call it a victory and go about his business. And Abraham Buford's only response to that entire letter, 2 pages, was 1 sentence. And it says, "I shall defend myself to the final extremity. Yours sincerely, Abraham Buford." That was the worst response anyone could have ever made to a man like Tarleton. Because what finally ensues is you have Tarleton charging at the main ranks of Americans with his legion. And you have some Continentals that are trying to surrender, some that are trying to fight, some that's having a mixture of both. And as Tarleton is trying to call it to charge because no one knows what the heck is going on, someone shoots the horse. He falls down, gets knocked unconscious for a brief moment, and that's when the men go into a fight fury mode. Because the one thing you don't do in this time of warfare is you shoot the commander. Like, you never do that unless you really want to whoop him, because like that's their commander. That's the man that's in charge of keeping everybody in line. So if you shoot him, the officers aren't going to take that crap, and then the privates are going to take that crap because they're already getting shot at. What's that going to make a difference?
So we have our two commanders. We have Daniel Morgan, experienced, hardy, all-American frontiersman.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Banastre Tarleton, aggressive, young, ambitious, criminally handsome. If you've ever seen his portrait, he's a good-looking guy. I wouldn't mind grabbing a beer with him. So let us break down. I don't want to disrespect Kings Mountain. That'll be for another live stream. The Battle of Kings Mountain happens, and the loyalists in the upstate are basically taken out of the equation. So we're going to knock that out of the way. If you want to say anything else on that, but I want to get us to Cowpens because there's so much history to be involved here.
Oh, yeah. Okay, real quick. Kings Mountain, we win. Woo! Cowpens. So to finally start getting into that a little bit, we're going to go to a week before, right? So we're slowly getting into that story.
What's the time? We're in January of 1781?
Yeah, just around turn of the new year.
Okay.
Morgan has now successfully taken his men to a place called Grindal Shoals off the Packlet River, where he is so far undetected, but is aware that there is a British force that's kind of tracking him down a little bit. And that force is going to be Banastre Tarleton. Cornwallis is aware that there is now a new continental threat somewhere in the backcountry of South Carolina. And to combat that threat, he is going to send Tarleton to chase after with his British Legion and reinforces that army with nearly every single one of his light troops he has available at his camp back in Camden. That is a very bold and later will be a very costly move for Cornwallis. So by January the 12th, Tarleton will have had his scouts find Daniel Morgan at Grindal Shoals. And at that point, Morgan is now going to make a hasty retreat from Grindal Shoals all the way towards the North Carolina border until he reaches the Cowpens, where he realizes he can no longer retreat, because if he does, he's going to lose the support he has gained from the locals. And Tarleton is going to constantly be on his heels. I think the furthest he ever gets away from him in that pursuit is probably 25 miles. He stays really, really, really close to Morgan the entire time. And Morgan has made such a hasty retreat that when he left the camp at Grindal Shoals, they leave all the camping supplies behind. All the tents, all the food, all the cooking supplies, everything is left behind. Tarleton even writes that, so hasty was the American retreat that the breakfast was still on the fires cooking. That's how fast they left. And so while they were running away hungry, the British soldiers with Tarleton were able to eat the breakfast real fast and then keep on going about their way, trying to chase down the army. That's how close they got at one point in time. So
what was Daniel Morgan? So Daniel Morgan's objectives, his missions, what Nathaniel Greene tells him, is to just go down to the upcountry and cause a ruckus, but don't fight the British, or don't get involved in any major engagements? Okay.
Cause a ruckus a little bit with the British, but don't go into a full frontal confrontation, because, again, we see what happens at Camden, and we don't want a repeat of that because, again, that was horrible. Remember, worst thing you can possibly imagine, worse than that. We don't want a part two of that. So whenever Morgan finally gets to the Cowpens, why he decides to stop there is for a couple of significant reasons. One is because he realizes he is super duper close to the North Carolina border. The Broad River at that point was probably about 5 miles away from him, and it was swollen. So he's going to have a hard time trying to cross that river. But he also realizes that with the support he's able to gain, I mentioned he has about 1,500 men with him, give or take a little bit. The majority of that 1,500 are going to be South Carolinian militiamen, people who resided in this part of the backcountry more specifically. You do have some other Virginians thrown in there too. You have some North Carolinians, and you do have some Georgians in there. So you have a lot of representation from a lot of these states in the South joining the American fighting effort here in South Carolina. But those South Carolinians make up a large portion of that. And he realizes if he goes way too far into the north and crosses over that border, he's going to lose South Carolinian support because those men are not loyal to the Patriot cause and to the Continental Army. They are loyal to their home. They are loyal to where they are trying to protect their families, their homesteads, their way of life alone is what's on the plate. And they are trying to defend that, not trying to fight for the greater cause. Because one thing that people don't really realize in South Carolina is that the South Carolinians themselves, even before the Revolutionary War, had been fighting amongst themselves the entire time while we were down here. Mainly from things called the Regulator Movement, which we can dive into another time if we want to get really into it. But you pretty much have two political ideologies clashing together with the Loyalist and Patriot efforts. And things like the Battle of Kings Mountain are going to happen where these two people clash together. So these Patriots that are joining Morgan are trying to combat that situation, not the act for independence entirely. So he's got these people with him. And he also realizes that in South Carolina, there needs to be something for the Patriot cause. Because, again, if he leaves, more than likely the patriotic cause dies with his departure from South Carolina. So we really can't afford anything less than full victory at this point because, I mean, we need it. That's just the flat out honest to God truth.
All right. That's interesting to think about geography. The borders is actually having you cross the border, but those Carolinians are not going to be crossing into North Carolina. Never actually thought about that. And so what orders does Cornwallis give Tarleton? Hunt him down, take him out?
Pretty much.
Do you think Cornwallis gave Tarleton too much freedom?
I will say this, and it can be up for public opinion to harass me later on if they'd like. I feel that when Cornwallis gives Tarleton the authority to lead that light army in pursuit of Morgan, I feel that in the sense of war, if I had to be a Brit and if I had to be a loyalist, he is doing what he is supposed to be doing, Tarleton. He's following orders to a T. He is trying to diminish the opposition's war effort, and in doing so, he is trying to hunt down an American contingent. Now, I didn't say he was trying to kill all of them. His only goal is to try and knock it out of commission, right? So if that means capturing prisoners, then he's capturing prisoners. But one thing to keep note of is that Tarleton is very, very notable on telling his men to take no prisoners whatsoever. So, Tarleton's going to do what Tarleton's going to do. But in my opinion, Tarleton is Cornwallis's best and most trusted officer. He is the definition of what a true officer should be. And when Cornwallis gives him the authority to track down this unit, I think Tarleton is doing what he should, right? Now, in the sense of a patriot, I don't like the man at all. But he is an officer through and through, right? Makes sense?
Okay. Yeah, it does. So we've Tarleton chases Daniel Morgan. Morgan can't cross over into North Carolina. He'll lose his South Carolina support. He needs to have a victory. So let's get into the Battle of Cowpens.
All right, heck yeah. So to fast track a little bit, by the early morning of January 17th, Tarleton will have found Morgan's trail. He will follow it, and he will make his way to the Cowpens, right? Now, one thing to keep note of is that when Morgan actually stops, and I kind of mentioned it a little bit before, he is going to try his best to get this army into a fighting spirit in the best way he can, right? So those the stories I mentioned about how he got shot in the back of the neck, how he got lashed a couple of times. He begins telling these men these stories, the militiamen more exactly, to try to get them in better spirits to fight for him in the morning. And it works, right? Because not only is Morgan telling these men stories of the glory days, he's also telling them, I've got your best interests in mind. I know how I'm going to have you fight the next morning. And at the same time, he's trying to get his American Continentals in the fighting spirit as well. In fact, one thing to keep note of with the Battle of Cowpens is that when Morgan is marching, trying to get away from the British threat, his men are cursing his name because they're not fighting. They're not doing anything to take care of the threat that's been chasing them for a little while. And they're ready for action, right? This is their moment to shine. So when Morgan finally stops, people begin training more, they begin drilling, they begin taking care of themselves. It is a massive 180 in the American fighting spirit. And then that same night, too, you actually have a militiaman named Thomas Young who actually writes that when they were gearing up for the battle the next morning, Morgan was super, super restless because he knew what was going to be coming up. And so while Tarleton is trying to force march his men from 2 o'clock in the morning to the Cowpens battlefield, you've got Morgan walking around the camp with his men. They are sleeping on the cold, wet ground. And while they're trying to do that, Morgan's walking around saying, don't worry about a single thing. In fact, he says, and I quote, "Just hold your heads high, boys, 3 fires, and then you are free. And once you return to your homes, how the old men will thank you and the ladies kiss you for your gallant conduct today." He is telling these men reassuring words. And at the same time, if you caught it, he's telling these men his battle plan he has in mind. So for the American militia, analyze this for a second. It's really cool. Just hold your heads high, boys. Give me courage. Give me faith. 3 fires, and then you are free. Give me 3 shots with your long rifles and your fowlers, and you can go. And once you return to your homes, when you get back home, how the old men will thank you and the ladies will kiss you for your gallant conduct today. In translation, how everyone will thank you and how everyone will bless you for what you did, because this was a notable and very remarkable moment you have just achieved in that second, right? Morgan is asking for a little bit so he can get a whole lot in return. And these militiamen are, they're taking note of this. And Thomas Young even says that that moment he knew that he was one of them, and that he knows that he barely slept a wink that night trying to convince these men that that was the case. So these Americans are resting up. They are getting super into the fighting spirit. And Tarleton, in return, is still force marching his men to the Cowpens battlefield and will arrive there about 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, and the sun has not even risen at that point. The grounds are still super dark. There's a dim sunlight coming over the horizon. By dim, I mean like early morning. And he's got scouts riding ahead, but they are not going to be aware of what is actually in the field in front of them until they actually come face to face with the threat. So Tarleton is pretty much walking into a blind trap, and Morgan is setting up one of the most perfect traps in the entire American Revolution in the exact same moment. It's very, very, very remarkable what actually happens. So any questions before we continue with anything?
No. Take us through.
All right. Now here comes the bread and butter. So Tarleton will have his men marching onto the field. He are in column formation as they are approaching. And when they are approaching the battlefield, Tarleton's scouts already take note that there is something amiss in front of them. More specifically, they take note that there are columns in front of them, battle lines, what have you, right? There is something ahead. It is not friendly. And Tarleton now has to be given the daunting task of trying to form his ranks in the dark while trying to figure out what is exactly in front of him. And Tarleton does not have the whole story when he fills his ranks. So to give you an early view of what that he's actually coming up against, I told you Morgan gave his militiamen the battle plan from the very get-go. Morgan has decided to form 3 lines of defensive positions that are going to be progressively stronger as Tarleton charges further and further into the battlefield. So the very front line are going to be what we call skirmishers or riflemen. They are going to be tasked with targeting officers. The second line is going to be the militia forces themselves, those South Carolinians that were tasked with firing 3 shots and going home. And then in the very rear are going to be those American Continentals, the men who have seen every type of combat from Kingdom Come to at that very moment. And then you are going to have in the reserve some of William Washington's 3rd Continental Light Dragoons, who have been with the Army for a while now, and they are being tasked with just being the moral support for the American militiamen, right? Now, when Tarleton charges onto the battlefield, he orders his men to drop their packs because they understand there's a fight coming. He will begin forming his ranks, and those riflemen automatically, as soon as they see those officers, begin opening fire.
Do we know the distances? Do we know distances at which they're opening fire at?
So at the position that the battlefield says that they are marked at, that's a distance of over about 240 yards or less.
Okay.
And you got to think too, Morgan is not putting anybody with a rifle out there on the front. He's putting people who are expert shots, hunters, riflemen, rifle makers. Sorry. Anybody who has been shooting a squirrel gun for a long time and shooting squirrels, he is giving that task to. In fact, so knowledgeable is Morgan with the capability of a long rifle. Going all the way back to 1777, Daniel Morgan was actually at the Battle of Saratoga. More specifically, how I mentioned earlier, he's in command of that rifle corps, right? Morgan's rifles, they are at the Battle of Freeman's Farm, Beams's Heights, and as they are, gearing up for the actual battle itself, Benedict Arnold tells Morgan that there's going to be a target on the field that they are to paint, that every rifleman is going to have to try and take a shot at, because it is that big of a deal that guy is going to be there. So battle commences. Morgan's watching it. He's got about 12 riflemen with him. All of a sudden, from the corner of his eye, he sees a white horse run to the battlefield, and an officer mounts it. He automatically knows who it is, and he turns to a kid named Timothy Murphy and says, "Do you see that officer over yonder on that white horse? That officer be General Fraser. Now, while it is that I greatly admire this man, it is necessary that he dies. So do your duty." And what happens is Timothy Murphy actually climbs into a tree, perches his rifle onto a branch in front of him, and he takes out Simon Fraser from a distance of over 350 yards away. It is an incredibly excessive distance. And I think the story is he shoots him through the gut and he dies like that afternoon. It's a horrible, gut-wrenching death that he suffers, but it's because of that rifle shot. It's impeccable. And whenever I'm talking about this with other people, I always tell them, if Morgan if it's not beneath him to shoot a general, more specifically General Fraser, is it going to be beneath him to shoot these officers? And usually it's like an overwhelming no. Yeah. So more specifically, he tells them to target the epaulets and the colors, target the epaulets and the stripes, because those are the officers. So battle commences, artillery begins going off, and as soon as riflemen can pick their targets, with the sun slowly coming up behind them, they can see the silhouettes of the soldiers, and they begin opening fire. They're cracking heads. They're shooting people left and right. And there's probably about 150 of those guys in that position. They're scattered all throughout the field. They have perfect cover. They can't be seen very well because it's early in the morning. And Tarleton, trying to find some way to make it easier for his infantry to fill their ranks, is going to send a cavalry charge ahead to try and dislodge the line. And in just a few short minutes, there's going to be a cavalry charge going to try and dislodge it. And when they come back, they're going to have an excessive amount of empty saddles returning to the main battle lines. It's crazy how accurate these riflemen are from the beginning of the battle. Once this line has successfully diminished the ranks of the officers and the cavalry, the infantry are fielded. They're going to begin charging with bayonets at that first rank, and that line is going to dislodge itself and move back to the American militia line that was just behind it, that was concealed by a slight ridge that blocked the view from the British perspective. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So the British can't see three lines of men in front of them. They just they run into these skirmishers, and they push them back.
Pretty much.
Can they?
That's one. Go ahead.
I was saying, from the British commander's perspective, can he see, hey, I have this line of skirmishers, I have another line of looks like militia, and then in the background, can he see Continentals, or is he kind of just going over the battlefield and figuring it out? He's just like, hey, I have ran into a blocking force on this road. I'm going to engage them and push them off the
field. Pretty much. And that's usually a detail I kind of accidentally graze over because I get so enthralled with the dialogue of talking about the Battle of Cowpens. What Tarleton does not realize, but what he takes note of later on, is that the field is not completely flat like he expects it to be. It is undulating. There are gentle rolling hills going through the field. And so when he sees those riflemen, he assumes that it's more of a rear guard, right? And usually in armies in this time period, when you see a rear guard, you are super, super, super close to your target, which are these American Continentals, right? So he is going to charge them so aggressively because he's trying to get to that main Continental threat, not the riflemen. So he's going to cross over that hill, and then he sees the line of the militia, and he himself says he thinks he sees about 1,000 militiamen in that little swell right there. And Morgan had given them specific orders to not shoot until they get within what's called killing distance, which is kind of translatable to see the whites of their eyes, right? It is there where the militiamen are going to deliver 2, not 3, devastating volleys to the British charge. And once those militiamen fire and then retreat, Tarleton is going to send forward cavalry, more specifically from the 17th Light Dragoon Regiment, to target and try to destroy what they can of these American militiamen who are trying to get off the battlefield. Because not only have these American militiamen been fighting with the American armies and also fighting in the South Carolinian Civil War, they themselves have also fought against Tarleton personally at previous battles in the past. So these militiamen have a vendetta. Tarleton has a vendetta, and Tarleton's going to do what Tarleton does to get rid of these people. It's a mess. You even have people. You have veterans from the Battle of Kings Mountain here. So you've got people who have seen combat from day one of the Revolution, who are already experienced enough to know when's a good time to fire and when's a good time to run. And Morgan is going to take complete advantage of this. Another thing to keep note with these American militiamen, why Morgan tells them this 3 fires from you are free order is because these are the exact same militiamen who were at the Battle of Camden. And these exact same militiamen are the reason why the Battle of Camden was such a failure. These militiamen are experienced only in their areas of expertise, right? So you are not going to, well, let me ask you, if you have American militiamen who are not trained to shoot a musket or fix a bayonet and then charge that bayonet, is it in your best interest to put them against an infantry unit that is trained?
No, it is not.
Nope. No, it is not. That's what Horatio Gates does at the Battle of Camden. And whenever these American militiamen are trying to fight against these British soldiers who are highly experienced, the quote is that these American riflemen take their guns and throw them in front of them while they are still loaded, so don't even fire a shot, and they run away. So Morgan combats this by giving them the opportunity to fire and then running away. He's like, you're going to go ahead and run anyways, so I'm just going to make a part of the plan. So now everyone's happy. So once these American militiamen retreat, once the cavalry from the British side are engaged, Morgan is now getting closer and closer to the final climax of the battle. Now, one thing that's really cool to note too is just how undulating the Cowpens is. So dense is the area around the Cowpens, and so rolling is the actual field itself, that Morgan's able to hide his troops in plain sight. And one unit more specifically, the 3rd Continental Light Dragoon Regiment, is able to hide completely concealed from view. William Washington, beginning of the battle, actually is forced to move his encampment to a side of the field, kind of in the woods a little bit. And when he does this, Morgan makes note that he can't see anything from where Washington is, and Washington can't see the field. So they are totally and utterly concealed to a point to where Morgan tells them to just stay in that position and then to not make a move until you hear the commotion coming to you. Well, when the cavalry from the British began charging the American militiamen, that's the cue. They come out of hiding, totally surprising the British cavalry, and the clash is so violent that nearly a 50-man detachment of British cavalry are wiped out to lower than half their number by the time the engagement's done. It's devastating. And in fact, I think, according to some sources, the Battle of Cowpens is actually the 3rd largest cavalry engagement in the entire war. It's like an 80 v 50 engagement for cavalry. It's insane. 3rd or 4th. I'll have to go back and check up on that, but I believe it's a pretty large engagement. So the cavalry have engaged, the infantry lines have fallen back, and now you have the climax where there are no more cavalry to worry about. The artillery is holding back because the lines are getting so close together. It is now up to these American Continentals and the British Army itself to fight to figure out who's going to win this actual engagement. So with the American Continental Line, with this line, there's a couple of really cool stories with them too. When the American Continental Line is actually stationed at Cowpens and they're forming their battle lines, you have to remember these are men who were at the Battle of Camden. These are men who have heard the horror stories of Waxhaws and Charlestown, and these are men who have seen every instance of combat in the war from day one nearly. I think with the Battle of Cowpens, there's actually one confirmed veteran from the Battle of Bunker Hill. There are a bunch of these men who had their baptism of fire in the New York campaign of 1776. You've got most of these men coming from places like Saratoga, Quebec, Brandywine, Morristown, Germantown, Trenton. And so these men are seeing a lot of these great victories and a lot of these great defeats to a point to where these men are so seasoned. When they see British bayonets, they go, okay, big whoop. We'll fight them back. So they're trained, they're ready, they're good to go. And when the British cross over that second hill, they had no idea the Continentals were even there. And that was the whole idea for Daniel Morgan, to make it to a point to where Tarleton will know the threat is somewhere close by, but he will not know exactly until he comes upon it by accident. By the time he sees the American Continental Line, it's like strike 3, you're out of here. So now the American Continentals are going to begin fighting the British in some places where the lines get so close, hand-to-hand combat is immediately experienced. So fast forward a little bit, you've got nearly 500 soldiers, because these Continentals are going to be supplemented by Virginians, fighting against probably at this point maybe a similar number, if not maybe a couple of hundred more British soldiers. And these are not just loyalist provincial units. These are actually the best of the British Army in the entire South fighting against these men. So you've got two very well-seasoned, very veteran troops fighting each other in the middle of an open field that has just now been discovered at that point. So when the Battle of Cowpens gets to this point, we fast forward a little bit, and it's pretty much gone to a stalemate. Everybody's kind of duking it out. And Tarleton realizes that because the way the Cowpens kind of funnels the troops in, he's gotten into a wider area. So he's got more room to kind of play with some troops a little bit. And one of those troops is going to be a battalion of the 71st Scottish Highland Regiment, shock troops, right? And so he's going to order that unit to operate along the Americans' rightmost flank on the battlefield to try and fire into its side to kind of throw off the attention of the battle. And when he does this, John Eager Howard of Maryland, the same officer who led the men out of harm's way at Camden, is going to order a refuse to flank order. So in this case, if you had a straight line, the men on the side over here are going to kind of swing like a door back a little bit to try and hold off the attention of that one flank to, keep the center of the line stable. However, because of multiple things happening, more specifically the fog of war, loud music like bagpipes from the Scots, gunfire, your ears are probably ringing because there's no earplugs. The order's misunderstood, and rather than this happening, this begins to happen. Those Americans on the right flank begin to fall back a little bit. Not in a disorderly, turn around run order, but they're, keeping column formation, about facing, and then just kind of marching away. Now, due to all of these different factors, monkey see, monkey do begins to happen in the best way I can put it. And so as one line falls back, the other one falls back until nearly, instead of the one side swinging, the entire line kind of begins to swing itself. It's really, really weird. So weird that Daniel Morgan writes to Howard and asks him, what the heck are you doing? Like, why are you men retreating? What, like, are you defeated? Like, he's genuinely concerned at this point. And Howard responds to Morgan with the words, I am not defeated, for have you ever seen men retreat in such order in the heat of battle? Because one thing Morgan failed to realize is that these men had turned around and began marching off of the battlefield, maintaining their composure and their order. Mind you, the British are still probably a good 35, 40 yards away. So it's crazy. Like, he wasn't expecting this at all. So Morgan tells Howard, okay, we're going to change the game plan a little bit. There's another rise just behind us, probably a good 25, 40 yards away. Take your men there, park it, about face, and then fire. Kind of like when we were at Kershaw, we did that, halt front order. That's what's happening. So mind you're not marching like 15 steps and 50 paces, but once they get to that reverse position, John Eager Howard orders that halt front order. The Americans turn around, they fire a devastating volley into the British, and at that point the British had charged so heavily into the Americans, they were probably about 15 yards away when that volley is fired. So it is devastating. I think there's an account that says almost half of the line itself fell in that very moment. And then what happened that's truly remarkable is that these American Continentals, who already had their bayonets fixed, just charged into the remaining ranks of the British Army. And so what you see happening there is a very, very unique moment where the Americans are able to not only absorb the momentum of the British bayonet charge, but they absorb it and then reverse it right back into them. So here you are at this very crucial moment in the entire war itself. And as Morgan is watching this, he actually rides back to where the encampment was. He's hoping he can find somebody there who can, he can send out some more men, kind of bolster up the fighting effort. And what he finds is that one of the officers, Andrew Pickens, who, again, we can dive into another time if we want to, a very trusted officer of his, that actually kept the militiamen at the battlefield site. And rather than them going home, a lot of them by choice stayed until they were able to come back in for another part of the fight. And so Morgan has nearly 1,000 militiamen coming from literally out of the woodwork. Like,
so wait a minute. So Morgan actually said, "Go home." Like, you're just shoot a couple of rounds, then you can leave.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
He was being honest about that.
He told these men, he's like, I will do what you can and go home. I'm not going to have you staying here because you're going to run anyways. He's giving them a way out, right?
Yeah.
And these men on their own accord stayed just in case they needed to do anything else. And he sends nearly the entire militia force he had out there onto the field, and they actually begin to kind of surround the British a little bit. Tarleton, when he sees this, is going to try launching a couple of efforts to begin fighting at the Americans. And there's a really unique reason why they don't. I'll kind of break into a little bit once kind of the main story's done. And when the American militiamen begin surrounding the British army, you have a lot of men trying to make their escape, right? So you begin running off the field and then realize it's an open field and they can't run away anymore. And Washington's cavalry, who are still engaging with the British, is going to notice this, and he's going to break off his engagement. He's actually going to cup off that really big bowl that the American infantry had made, totally enveloping the entire British force at Cowpens. And so in a little under 30 minutes, the time frame I think I've come to find, the Americans are able to take 1,500 men, fight a totally superior fighting force, diminish it, and completely surround it from both sides. A double envelopment maneuver is what happens. And so rare are those maneuvers in military history that at Cowpens is the last time a successful double envelopment was conducted in a field of combat ever.
Really?
Yeah. So it's a very unique circumstance for the Revolution. It's a very unique circumstance for military history in general. And again, Tarleton, who's trying to find a way to send reinforcements into the battlefield, his men are just not going to fight at all. And eventually he has to turn around, he has to leave because he's lost a lot of his infantry. So with that, the Battle of Cowpens is pretty much over. And what the numbers kind of mount up for Tarleton is that he arrives with about 1,200 men, some of the best light infantry he had, some of the best cavalry he had. And whenever he is done in 30 minutes, he sustains 87% casualties to his army.
87%?
87%. There's you a statistic right there. Morgan, I don't have a percentage on this because the numbers kind of get skewed a little bit, so I kind of quit worrying about percentages with this guy. With 1,500 men, possibly more, he only loses about 12 to 24 men killed in action, about 110 wounded, and none captured, none missing. So he sustains very minimal casualties considering. Tarleton, I think the numbers kind of mount up to about 110 rank and file killed, with about 27 of those being officers. And then he is going to lose 230 wounded, with a large some of those being officers, and nearly 600 to 800 men captured as prisoner, considering if you count some of those wounded as part of the prisoner count. And with that, the Battle of Cowpens is pretty much over. Tarleton gets chased a little bit by Washington, takes a wrong turn down the road, loses him, and while Morgan is tasked with trying to get the army across the Broad River to a place called Gilbertstown a little bit later on down the road, Tarleton is lost in the dark. He has no army, and he is trying to find Cornwallis's camp, where some of his men who survived the battle are already there telling Cornwallis of defeat. And so flustered, so angry was Cornwallis that while he was leaning on the hilt of his sword trying to take a little bit of pressure away, he breaks it at the hilt because he leans too hard on it. I believe that's how the story goes. There's a lot of myth to that story because I think some patriot prisoner makes the story up while he's being questioned, not from the Cowpen story but from somewhere else. And that's pretty much it. It's a quick, very devastating defeat for the British, and Tarleton never fully recovers from it. I think after the Battle of Cowpens, so the British Legion actually had an infantry corps as well as a cavalry corps. He no longer has infantry after this because it's just not possible anymore. He's never given a total command like that ever again, and he only maintains his lieutenant colonel rank as a cavalry captain or a cavalry leader, not an overall corps commander. And his last big huzzah is at the Battle of Gloucester Point and the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And whenever that's done, goes back home, serves in Parliament for a couple of years, and then That's it. Um, Morgan, after this, actually has to retire because at the Battle of Cowpens, he was becoming sickly, and he does not serve in the military anymore after that until finally, when the Whiskey Rebellion happens up in the north, he sends a private army to kind of quell that, and that's his last big huzzah for his military career. Um, I mentioned that the British dragoons under Tarleton were kind of hesitant to kind of fight in that last big push. And the reason for that is that when Tarleton gained reinforcements for his British legions, he actually had taken reinforcements from some of the prisoners from the Battle of Camden. And why those men would not fight is because they actually saw a lot of their former comrades in the ranks of the Continental Army. So they were scared of being, killed for going turncoat. They were scared of what would happen to them. So they didn't fight.
As you would.
And
That makes sense.
yeah, as you would. And that's it. The Battle of Cowpens is over, and the Americans are it's so great is the victory for the Americans that I forget the general's name, but he's able to he writes that the victory is so good that he believes that Morgan had paved the way for the salvation of this country. It's very remarkable. So after this is over with, all the people go home. Country is established. 9 months from the day of the Battle of Cowpens, Yorktown is won, and everything kind of sets itself into place, right? When the war is over, there is a sergeant, I think his name is Roderick Mackenzie, and there's a man named Archibald MacArthur, who are taken prisoner from the Scots Highland Regiment. MacArthur is going to be one of Tarleton's biggest critics when the war is over with. And I like kind of quoting him because he establishes why the Battle of Cowpens is so significant for the Americans. He himself quotes that, not only was the Battle of Cowpens at the fault of that boy Tarleton under dreadful bad management, but he says that if it would not have been for the loss of all the light infantry at the Battle of Cowpens, Yorktown would have never have happened.
Oh, really?
Meaning, yeah. So not only do I, in the modern sense, with all the information I have, say the Battle of Cowpens was significant in that regard, but an officer, a mere couple of weeks after the battle was over, himself even states that because of the Battle of Cowpens, Yorktown was allowed to happen. And to pretty much end the conversation right then and there, if it's not for the Battle of Cowpens and the victory sustained there, you do not have any of the other events, including Yorktown, happening that lead to the eventual victory that the Americans gained to gain the independence for this country. And I mean, you can still go visit the battlefield too. I mean, it's a small 800-acre park. Not a whole lot going on there throughout the year, but people kind of fail to realize that when you go there, you're standing on ground that pretty much gave you the country you get to walk in today. And then the flag you see flying is held up there thanks to the victory that those men gained at that field. And when you go there and when there's nobody there, it's a very surreal moment because when you realize all of these facts, it leaves you at a loss of words. Like I myself am finding it really hard to kind of describe how it makes me feel because you can't describe it. And to this day, there are still men who are there who died at that battlefield to give us those freedoms and to give us the country we live in. And it's just it gives you a different kind of feeling when you go there.
Okay. Well, we'll probably go till the end of the hour, so another 20 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, please put those down in the comments. I'll just kind of read these out real quick, Jeff. So some said, Chris Sheffield said he is Mel Gibson. He approves of the message. Some say Gates is still running to this very day.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Neon Spandex 3419, what a name, says First Virginia in the house. We all dead from Camden. And so just gotta love it.
Mm-hmm.
So for the last 20 minutes, let's kind of the battlefield of Cowpens. Is it just so it's like rolling kind of slight hills interspersed because the Don Trioni painting has like oak trees, kind of like short grass and oak trees and stuff.
Right. So again, I live close proximity to it. I go there about all the time just to go for walks and stuff. when you go there, it's kind of it's weird because you hear about the battle being described in paintings by Troyani, and then you read about it, and when you go there, it's kind of hard to see everything. You have to have an imagination that's really good to kind of see what's going on in that battlefield. Um, where the Park Service says that the British battle line is established, um, there's going to be a bit of a rolling slope that kind of goes up, and there's a big rise. And when you're at that position on the Green River Road, you can't see past it. But then when you get to that rise, you can pretty much see it clear down the field. Um, there are going to be a lot of hardwood trees like oak, sweet gum, that will kind of give you the idea that it's probably going to be a little hard to see what's going on in certain areas of the battlefield. But you have to also keep in mind, too, you're not there like super early in the morning. So things are not going to be concealed, whereas they would be super early in the morning. And plus, you got to think to 250 years of erosion, development on the battlefield itself. It's not always been an open field. They have only just recently restored that within the past 50 years. I think the story is that the Park Service actually bought the field in 1972, and they had to remove a bunch of buildings and two major highways off of the actual field to restore it to what it is today. Even then, it is still an active restoration in progress. So yeah.
Why did Daniel Morgan pick? He picked that battle site, right? He picked Cowpens. So. Do we know if he had any other options? Was that his favorite? Like, kind of a little more insight on that.
So with that, there's not really.
Where did he get this idea? Well, and where did he get this idea for 3 lines? Because they try that again at Guilford Courthouse, not to as good of success, but
right. Well, Guilford Courthouse kind of has its own drawbacks, and like we said earlier, we can talk about those at a different time if we want to. But what happens with Cowpens? Why he picks the field? I mean, it kind of just happens. He doesn't have, like, with Cornwallis, they'll go around and they'll look at a couple of different places, like, okay, here's where a battle's going to happen. Morgan nor Tarleton are going to actively plan this battle for days on end. That's kind of a really common misconception with the Battle of Cowpens. It's like, oh, the whole thing was planned. No, it wasn't. It was quite literally a last moment, last ditch effort to try and find something to do. So Morgan, when he gets there by, I think, noon or by 3 o'clock on the 16th, he actually has a militia captain who lives close by in the area and says, okay, tell me if this feels good enough or not. He's like, honestly, we're going to have a fight here anyways, but I want you to help me figure out what we're going to do here. And his name is Dennis Tremmel. And by the time Morgan actually gets done talking to the man, so influential are his words to him that Morgan tells him to spread the word that this field's going to hold victory or it's going to hold Morgan's bones, because that's how confident he is in the field he's picked.
So he has, like, what, a day to kind of get a lay of the land?
Not even 24 hours.
Okay. Because he's like, these guys turn, stand, fight, and this is what's going to happen.
Pretty much. Yeah, and where he gets his idea to make those 3 defensive lines, he's walking throughout the entire camp for the entire night. He's not sleeping at all. Morgan is a very ingenious individual, in the fact that he knows his men, he knows his men's strengths. And so what he decides to do, he's going to make this really weird defensive barrier where he's going to have long range fighters in the front, men in the middle who are capable of fighting in that kind of environment. And he's going to have his Continentals in the back that are the strongest line he has, but he's trying to preserve them while allowing them to fight at the same time. It's a really weird mixture of things going on. And like I said, he doesn't really have a whole lot of time to plan this thing. So he's kind of just throwing men where he can, allowing them to fight. And he figures in his own mind that if they can fight in a defensive stance, it will probably fare off better for them than trying to fight in offensive. Plus, again, he is aware Tarleton does not know where the men are. He knows that he knows of them, but he doesn't know where exactly they're going to be until it's too late. So Morgan is really playing into his enemy's strengths and his enemy's weaknesses.
So Coolhand 1961 asked, did Morgan suffer reparations from his defeat? I think you mean Morgan wins, but Tarleton never again has independent command. And the wars, I mean, this is January 1781, and Battle of Yorktown is in October. The war goes on for another 2 years, but the major combat operations are basically wrapped up within the year.
Right.
So Tarleton is Yes. So reparations for Tarleton. He loses command. He goes. So Tarleton survives, though, right? So that's
Yeah,
what's
he
the.
survives.
So
So Tarleton,
87% of your command is knocked out, but you get
yeah,
away.
yeah, it's not looking
That's
too good for him.
called some white boy shoulders right there.
Um, so yeah, that brings up a really good point. And I'm really glad he asked that. So Tarleton, funnily enough, well, that's not even a word. Funny enough, when he gets back to Cornwallis, of course, Cornwallis is absolutely furious because now not only has he lost a good chunk of his army, but what people don't really realize is that Cornwallis has lost all of his light infantry. That was the key word being light. Those are men who are equipped to go ahead of the main army to be the eyes and ears. That's why Yorktown happens, is because of the loss of the light infantry and the light cavalry he had. Keyword being had, because he lost every single bit of it. But whenever Tarleton gets back, he actually starts making these arguments. And this is why Sergeant MacArthur is like one of the biggest critics of Tarleton. Tarleton he pretty much demands Cornwallis give him a court martial to prove that it was not, in fact, any of his fault the battle was a loss. And Cornwallis finds him not guilty of it. And Tarleton blames
Really?
it on, yeah, Tarleton's argument is he blames it on the condition and the training of his own men versus himself. Now he still blames himself to a certain degree, but it's not making him lose any sleep at all. I mean, yeah, his ego's been damaged, but sometimes that's recoverable. At the end of the day, he's still going to be a wealthy Londoner. He's still going to be a prevalent man in British history. So it's not going to do him any harm because he's going to go back home a war hero anyways.
But in Tarleton's defense, though, there's a lot of battles where the British show up, they do their volley, bayonet charge, and the Americans break. So that is kind of standard operating procedure.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really, don't want to be really defending Tarleton here, but like when he goes back to Cornwallis is also a very aggressive commander. And Cornwallis does the same tactics at Guilford Courthouse 3 months later. He shows up, he finds Americans that are blocking him. He deploys, he pushes forward, he engages, 1 or 2 volleys, bayonet charge, pushes the first line off, goes to the second line, goes to the third line. So this is pretty standard British tactics of find and not even find, fix, attack, not find, fix, flank. They just do find, fix, attack. They just always trying to pin Americans down.
Oh yeah.
So in defense of Tarleton.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing that kind of makes Cowpens and Guilford Courthouse different, and it's kind of it's a crucial part of the story, but not one that kind of overlays or overtakes the rest of the story itself. The reason why Morgan picks the Cowpens is because his flanks are protected. Guilford Courthouse is not a good scenario for Nathaniel Greene because of the fact that, well, apart from his lines advancing way too soon, instead of being defensive positions, which again, conversation for a different day. There are way more than one entrance to the place at Guilford Courthouse, so there are plenty of opportunities for flanks. Now, mind you, it doesn't totally happen that way, but Guilford Courthouse is still a tragic, well, and that's another thing too. Guilford Courthouse is a really weird feared victory stance. There's not really a definitive victor or loser, but with Cowpens there is. And because Tarleton cannot operate within that field that he said was perfect for him, again, there's more damage to the ego, more damage to his dignity. But I mean, again, Tarleton never loses an inkling of sleep over it. And then again, he goes on to fight at places like Guilford Courthouse, Gloucester Point, which is across the bay from Yorktown. And I think the only thing he leaves the colonies with is the loss of his, I think it's these 2 fingers right here. So whenever he actually goes into Parliament in England, he actually has a really funny slogan he uses. I think it's, oh my God, I forget the name of the movie. But there's a scene in a movie where he's arguing for the slave trade because at that point in time where, England's considering getting rid of it. And one of his slogans is he will remove his prosthetic glove he wears and says, well, I gave for king and country, to make his point. And he's also arguing for it because he's a very big dealer in the slave trade. That's how he makes his money. That's how his whole family made his money. Or made their money. So it's for him, it's nothing. But for Morgan, again, like I say, he has to retire because he is sickly. One thing to note,
so that's
really,
Morgan's last. That's Morgan's last battle of the Revolution because he's out.
Yeah. It's his, and what's really funny though is like that is his only battle in the entire war that he feels a total command. His first and his only battle in the entire revolution.
It's a 1-for-1. That's a great record,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah. Morgan's got a 1-for-1 victory stance. I can't think of anybody else who can achieve that.
Tarleton has I guess Tarleton has a 1-for-1 because he won at Waxhaws. So I guess he wins one, loses one.
Waxhaws is questionable.
So let's go into some a little bit lesser known. John Eager Howard. If you have ever read the book or the audiobook, Washington's Immortals, about the first Maryland, probably one of the best regiments that are in the Continental Army. John Eager Howard is pretty predominant in that. So whatever happens to him, and why do we not know as much about John Edgar Howard?
So while we don't know much about him, it's kind of off to me too, because I've been reading books about him, especially Washington's Immortals, and he just kind of keeps a low profile. I mean, he's a major talking point in the war because again, he saves nearly his entire regiment at the Battle of Camden. Kind of similar. I like to kind of attribute him to the scene in Exodus in the Bible where he kind of leads his men through the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. It's just it's crazy what kind of stuff these men have to endure to the Battle of Camden because they're pretty much on their own. I know after the battle, John Eager Howard is actually given a medal for his service. That's another thing too. Out of nearly 12 medals awarded for service in the Revolution, up to 3 or maybe even 4 of those are awarded just for the Battle of Cowpens alone. John Eager Howard, William Washington, and Daniel Morgan all received medals for their service at the Battle of Cowpens. And out of all of 12 of those medals that are awarded, Cowpens is the only battle to have 3 awarded for service during that engagement. So it's that's how remarkable. Yeah, that's how remarkable it is. There's copies floating around somewhere. I saw a couple on eBay, but they're crazy. In fact, I think in the painting John Eager Howard received, like he gets made after the war's over with, he's actually wearing the medal. So it's really cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but I know he goes back to Maryland. He goes back to serve in Baltimore. I think he serves as a governor for a little bit of Maryland, serves in the Congress, and then he has a really successful political career after the war's over. And of course, like every great man in the world, he goes on and he dies and, becomes a legend in American history. And same thing with Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan is a politician, serves in Congress for a little bit, and then dies in 1803. Most of the people that fought for the American side kind of see that, end.
Cool Hand was asking, do we have any idea what Morgan's illness was?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what it was. He had a problem with his sciatica. So he was having a hard time walking. And then after the Battle of Cowpens, so not really during it, he's riding in the saddle so much, he actually he has what's called the piles, which are hemorrhoids. He gets hemorrhoids from riding in the saddle so much, and he gets so bad off with them. He has to ride in the back of a wagon till he gets back to Virginia. And even riding in the wagon is like super, super painful for him. So the man was like in his 40s or 50s when the Battle of Cowpens happened. Like I said, he's double the age of Tarleton. So in that day and age, he is an old as dirt kind of guy.
So, he's lived a hard life.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, you get shot in the back of the neck and survive. You got some credit there.
Doesn't get whipped. He goes up that whole movement on Quebec. And then I guess let's close out with William Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of I guess I don't want to say this in I don't mean disrespectfully, but second tier commanders like Light Horse Harry Lee, William Washington, Howard. Like everybody knows, if you know the Revolution, you kind of know the big ones. But William Washington and Howard are both wounded at Utah Springs. So
yep, I think Washington actually.
Washington.
Yeah, I think Washington actually gets bayoneted at Utah Springs, and miraculously survives. I think he. Oh my goodness, it's really weird. But with Washington, I know there's probably a common question going around: is he related to George Washington? And the answer is yes. He is a second cousin, once removed, of General George Washington. He comes from Virginia. Does whatever he wants to do up there in his early life, which is very unknown for some reason to me. I'll probably find it in a book somewhere. But whenever he is in the Revolution, most of his service is actually down here in the South by 1779. And most notable of his services are when he's fighting in the South, in and around Charlestown during the siege. One thing that makes Tarleton so remarkable at that moment is he is the man who's going around blocking off all the exit routes and entrances to Charlestown, trying to make it harder and harder for the Americans to escape. And a couple of those places are places called Monk's Corner and Lanud's Ferry. So at Monk's Corner, Washington is trying to defend the access route from Tarleton by, engaging with him. Of course, they lose. Tarleton forces them away. They retreat. The unit breaks up for a minute, and they try to reconvene at Lanud's Ferry. And it's at Lanud's Ferry where Tarleton finds the man again, kills the other commander of 3rd Continental Light Dragoon Regiment, or severely wounds him, I forget. And that now leaves Washington in command of the regiment. And even Washington himself is forced to escape from Lanud's Ferry. And Tarleton writes it in his memoirs that, we charged upon them so quickly with such surprise that Washington had to avail himself of his swimming and swim across the Enoree River to escape from Tarleton. Most of the men followed, and most of the men who couldn't swim drowned in the river while Washington and most of the officers got away. So when Washington fights Tarleton at the Battle of Cowpens, it's personal.
They cross swords, right?
They cross swords.
Yeah, that's cool.
They cross swords. And then to finish this up with a final note from the Battle of Cowpens, there's a really famous painting where you see the two sides clashing. The coats are really weird colors, but it's pretty much a good scene enough of the actual engagement. Washington pursues Tarleton, and he, as he's trying to pursue him, he's engaging with some of the Legion, cornets and some of the Legion privates. And as he engages, his sword breaks at the hilt, and a officer tries to go in for a killing blow at Washington. And prior to the battle, Washington said absolutely no pistols. He hates them, doesn't like them, so don't have them out there. And as this officer is trying to go for the killing blow on Washington, his servant boy, or his Batman for a synonym for that term, comes in with a pistol, shoots the officer, saves the day. And rather than Washington thanking his servant boy for saving his life, he just absolutely berates the man for shooting a guy with a pistol because he hated him so much. Yeah. And after that scene goes on, he, goes for Tarleton again. Tarleton goes for a killing blow, and Washington, like an absolute hero, absolute unit of this guy, actually blocks the sword with the hilt of his saber that got broken earlier. After that moment, Tarleton sees the rest of the cavalry joining in. The American infantry are starting to charge in their positions. They had just captured the cannons, killed every artilleryman to the last man, and now they were going for him. He runs away with remnants of his army, which are the cavalry. And to finish off the live stream with all of this, I quote, Washington yells to the top of his lungs, "Where is now the boasting Tarleton?" And that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. We'll have to have you back on. And what should we do the next one on? I think the hour and a half's a good amount of time. I like this.
Yeah. So the Southern Campaign, there's a lot of different avenues. If you want to leave it to people in your comment section, if they have any ideas, I'm more than happy to kind of take them up on that one. But really, the Southern Campaign really starts off with the Siege of Charlestown. I know we skipped over a bunch of that stuff to get to the Battle of Cowpens, but there has to be a turning point somewhere. You have to hear about the good stuff first. Charlestown can be a good starting point. We can go to the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, Kings Mountain. We mentioned that earlier. That battle is really crucial in the Southern Campaign as well. There's a bunch of places we can go. You can let me know.
Let's do Charlestown. So Charlestown? I can use that I can use that to start sourcing in my next video. So
no problem. Well, before we head out, is there any more small questions from the comments on your end? I'll be happy to answer them real quick.
Yeah, if we have them. It's pretty quiet crew.
All right.
But, all right, so I will end the stream. We'll just go backstage real quick. All right, thanks, guys, for watching. Have a good one.